Hey everyone, Phreak here. It's my very belated patch 9.4 rundown for those who want to get right to the patch. Skip forward till this screen shows the patch notes on it, because I'm going to spend maybe 30 seconds or so just sort of giving an update, I guess. As it stood, basically, there was no time for me to record the 9.4 rundown for the first 2 days the patch notes were out. I was just very busy with work and like other activities I had going on. So I had felt that since it was eventually like 2 to 3, now 4, now 5 days after the patch notes came out, that it wasn't going to be useful for me to record this video. That there was no longer going to be a market for it. It was going to be useless. I was going to spend a bunch of time doing something that no one wanted to watch. Yet for some reason, I kept getting tweets from a bunch of you people. Thank you, by the way, saying, "Hey, where's the rundown? I didn't see you say it was canceled. I didn't see any updates on your channel. What's going on? I really want this video." So, this is my attempt at a heartfelt thank you for being so interested in content that isn't even timely anymore. This means that I will, even if I'm going to be late, I will still put out these videos because apparently you seem to care a lot, and that is nothing but heartening. This will be much less math focused, by the way. Because ultimately I didn't feel there were any compelling math examples here. So it's going to be essentially running down how big I think the changes are and what they mean for the champion. But also, because it's so sort of far removed from the patch coming out, I have the benefit of hindsight and I can tell you how big the changes actually were. And I think it's kind of interesting. So here we move on to the actual patch itself. 9.4, of course, came out a little while ago. And one of the things that happened was Conqueror was too strong, got hotfixed down, and I will take this into account when I talk about Conqueror later on in the patch. Also, there is a bug fix with Nico. Okay, so let's talk about the fact that Karthus lost 5 base damage, which is 10% of its base damage on Lay Waste. Keep in mind, Karthus tends to build fairly high AP builds. Back in the day, his build used to be a bunch of flat pen because the ult ratio is very low. Those days are behind him. Those ratios have gone up. In general, this is not a huge deal. What's actually interesting is Karthus jungle did not actually lose. Okay, so in average elo, Karthus actually lost 2.5% win rate in the jungle. And actually in high elo, he lost 3%. So for some reason in my brain, I was like, oh, it's not that big of a nerf. But like, of course it is. Losing a lot of your base damage on Lay Waste is a really, really, really big deal to his jungle clear because obviously Q is a substantial part of the kit there. Karthus in lane didn't lose nearly as much. And I'm actually not seeing him pop up as a major win rate loss in solo lane. So I believe he mostly got pushed out of jungle. Is still, and like he's still playable in jungle. He's a champion that I would consider probably slightly weak. But if you're good at Karthus, I think still a viable pick. But I would not play him unless you're a good Karthus player as a jungler. In lane, I think he's still fine. Next up is Nerfs to Lucian. Now, if you didn't know, WMAX Lucian became a thing more recently. I think you probably should have stopped at maybe 2 or 3 points. I think going to 4 or 5 was a mistake because your other abilities do have meaningful rank up incentives. But people were basically putting points in a W to try to poke people out of lane because it's very, very easy to hit W. The base damage is 85, which is really high. You get 40 per rank, which isn't too bad. The mana cost is only 50, so if you have an 85 damage poke ability, it costs 50 mana. That's a really, really, really strong poke ability. Turns on his passive, wave clear, etc., etc., etc. Ultimately, WMAX is now worse, right? It's losing 10 damage at rank 1, 30 damage at rank 5. This is enough to probably make you not max W anymore. The mana cost going up as well kind of means a bit. And honestly, I think the 20 mana cost and 10 base damage down is the real sort of important part of the nerf. WMAX going away is fine. It's solid. It will be a slight downgrade for like the Lucians who were doing that. Also rip AP Lucian, I guess, but Lucian's definitely a fairly aggressive, fairly oppressive bot laner. I think the 20 mana cost and 10 damage is enough to make a difference here. He will lose a fair bit of power. Not a lot, less than 1%, but about 1%, which is what the data shows me over here as well on my cheat sheet that like one of the data analysts on the design team sends out, and I'm on the distribution for it. Yeah, I mean, definitely this matters, but Lucian is certainly still viable. I don't think he's a necessary ban. If you were like afraid of getting bullied in bot lane, I don't think you need to do that anymore. You could probably still start W level 1 though. Next up are a bunch of buffs to Rek'Sai that ended up being absolutely massive. Rek'Sai gained between like 2.5 and 3.5% win rate just from these changes, and then as people get better at the champion, it probably goes even higher than that. That's just a visual. Burrowed Q giving Fury, and it's only 4 Fury hits to make your E do a bunch of bonus stuff, so that's actually pretty good. So that's 1/4 of your Fury bar for Burrowed Q is pretty huge. If you do Burrow to get your Q back on cooldown, it's kind of small quality of life. That's kind of nice, but that's obviously a fairly big deal. The fact that like this is just more visible with Tremor Sense is just going to help people do better at the champion. The fact that Rek'Sai spawns in Burrowed so that she's going to run faster, that's going to help, just like little minor buffs there as well. And the fact that Void Rush basically can't be dodged unless you move like 1,000 range away or even more than that, but more than Flash can do for you is a huge deal as well. So Rek'Sai definitely gained an absolute ton here. Rek'Sai is going to be a terror of a jungler. Seems to be better in high elo than low elo, just as a champion in general. I expect fully that we see Rek'Sai in pro play as a result of this. Gets buffed because of Conqueror as well, but there's a lot of other competitive options that are as good as Conqueror, so this is not even a champion that's getting carried by the Conqueror rune being overtuned. I think she's just this strong now. Next up are changes to Sylas. First up is a nerf to W max, losing 5 points per rank up on the heal. That definitely is meaningful. It does matter. It will certainly affect how much he heals. The bigger thing, though, is an actual increase on the radius of the explosion against champions. And this is actually a pretty big deal. This ended up actually buffing Sylas by a little bit. Actually, I would say a pretty meaningful amount. Sylas gets pretty reasonably buffed here. Now, I know a lot of people weren't doing W max, so leaving W at rank 1 doesn't change anything, and just your Q being better. Like, if you're just like playing generic solo Q, you probably were doing Q max anyway. And that has been substantially buffed. This is actually a really, really big deal. This seems really small on paper. It actually means a lot. You are reliably doing more PvP damage. That's a big deal. Because he's a champion who wants to kill people. It's a really big deal. This ended up being a very large buff to Sylas. I think he's certainly now what I would consider a very strong champion. He still seems to require you to know the champ pretty well to succeed in general. But he is certainly, I think, very good now. W max is maybe going to get nerfed again at some point, but this champion seems great. Sylas seems very, very good, or seems completely fine. If you're good at the champion, you're going to be good in the game. He's in a pretty good spot, in my opinion. Small nerfs to Thresh. You max Q first anyway. As far as the actual impact of this nerf, it's not massive. It's under 1%. 10 extra mana cost, the cooldown nerf that goes away once you get to rank 5. Thresh is still a generally strong champion. He is very good. Again, it's another champion that really rewards you for knowing the champ well. He's a high mastery champion. But this is pretty much the right size of nerf, though. This puts Thresh in a really, really fair spot in solo queue. In pro play, he was the #1 most played support, most picked and banned support. So that probably still remains here. While people will feel this cooldown nerf, I think they will still try to play Thresh almost every single game. And he will probably remain at least a top 3, if not still the #1 support in pro. Next up, Urgot got freaking slaughtered. Urgot just was destroyed by this patch. And he was actually, I would consider, a reasonably fair solo queue champion. But clearly the most sought after top laner / mid laner, flex, whatever, in pro play, and certainly was deserving of nerfs. The most recent round of Urgot nerfs from before this patch, I thought put him into, as I said before, a good spot in solo queue, but it was not enough for pros to say, no, we're done with this. So this is the sledgehammer of nerfs, and it is massive. So 20 damage off the Q, which is a flat mana cost increase. 20 mana cost on Purge, which you won't get rank 2 of until level 8. So for all of laning phase, it's a significant mana cost increase there. And so gaining 40 mana on your entire combo is a really big deal. This ends up being about a 25% cost bump if you were going to cast every single spell once. That said, that's not really fair because you're not going to cast E as often as your other spells. This ultimately ends up being a really, really significant mana cost nerf. And what's kind of unfortunate here is pros tend to be more resilient to mana cost changes than your regular solo queue player. Urgot's nerfs are really big, but I think his win rate will kind of climb back up a little bit in solo queue as Urgot players get used to what those spells cost and recalibrate that difference. Pros are arguably faster at this and just tend to conserve mana more anyway. So I like this change because, hey, having mana constraints actually be a thing in League of Legends is a good thing, and all champs should have this, at least those who use mana. But at the same time, it's also, if you're trying to get the champion out of pro, but keep him viable in solo queue. Mana costs are also really not the right change, in my opinion. Equally large change is 30 points off the shield. So it's at rank 1, which is again going to be rank 1 until level 8, is half the value, and the ratio is half the value as well. That is a substantial nerf to his shield. That is really, 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 really big. That absolutely crushes his landing phase. Absolutely does. Worth noting that just for the math's sake, right, this is a flat 30 damage or 30 health off the shield. Every 200 HP is also 30 here. So it's a flat 30, and then every 200 health, bonus health, is another 30. That's the math, just so you know that, just so you have it for your head. But yeah, Urgot is dead in solo queue. Next up is Yasuo. This is a pretty big nerf, or I'd say a pretty meaningful nerf. It's probably the right amount. Maybe he could do a little bit more, to be honest, but 3 base attack damage and 20 critical strike damage. What's interesting to note, by the way, is essentially that this Q, the way it maths out with how Infinity Edge's unique passive crit damage works, you get the same crit damage. So basically, if you consider that old Yasuo had 80% crit damage on Q, back with the old Infinity Edge that doubled your crit chance, after this change, he's back to 80% crit damage with Infinity Edge. So like that ends up being the same sort of as before the crit item changes. Certainly deserving of nerfs. Yasuo's again another champion where if you're good at Yasuo, he's going to be worth playing. He was like a 70% presence pro play champion across the top regions for 8.3. And now 8.4 is coming out. We're never going to see 8.3 Yasuo in pro play ever again. I think Yasuo is still going to be viable. He will just not be overpowered. And pros should still be willing to play him. He is one of many viable options. And he's just balanced-ish in solo queue. Zed gets some pretty big changes. Some attack speed growth, 10 damage, and a 0.1 AD ratio on the Q. Extra range on the recast of Living Shadow, plus better cooldown, and he maxes last anyway. But his recompense is not getting extra attack damage off of Deathmark. This ended up being a buff overall. Getting extra attacks out, getting more Q damage, your W being more reliable. These are all really, really, really big buffs, and they more than cover the fact that Deathmark gives you less attack damage overall as an ability. This was actually pretty big for Zed. He gained about 1% win rate overall because of these changes. That might go up slightly over time. Generally speaking, if you change a champion, people have to now like relearn how to play as the character. You often see slight growth afterwards. But either way, Zed seems to be in a completely fine spot, completely reasonable champion. I'm honestly a little surprised we even buffed Zed at all. I didn't feel like he needed buffs as a champion, but slight hit here, gains about 1%. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. So Conqueror, right? Conqueror went from basically being a Grasp of the Undying trigger that then gave you bonus AD and some true damage. It now stacks up like the old Fervor of Battle, but it also works on spells as well. Of course, this 3 to 15 became, 2 to 10 Adaptive Force, and it's probably getting nerfed again next patch or so. And instead of getting 20% true damage, instead of converting 20% true damage, it converts 10%, but then heals you for the same amount. This ends up being a really, really big buff to the ability for anyone with low cooldowns. So if you think of, or high attack speed. So if you think of champions like Riven or Olaf in top lane especially, Kled, Aurelia, Kindred jungles good with this, Rek'Sai's jungle is good with this. Actually, lots of attack speed marksmen with low cooldown abilities. You think of champions like Ashe and Jinx. Can all make a lot of use out of Conqueror. And again, keep in mind that Conqueror is essentially lifesteal. So if you want to bypass having to buy lifesteal, you can just simply stack up Conqueror, get your health back that way, but it's only in champion combat. Either way, it ends up being really, really powerful. And this ended up being really huge buffs for several different fighter-type characters. Again, since this patch came out, it has been hotfixed down a bit, but still seems to be a large amount of power up for a lot of these characters. It does not seem to be... So even though now, instead of only giving AD, it gives Adaptive Force, which can mean ability power. So even though it can be usable on mages, there don't seem to be any mages where Conqueror is optimal. There are mages where it's viable, like Azir, but there don't seem to be any ones where Conqueror is now carrying the champion. So kind of keep that in mind, that for a lot of these mages, you're still better off going like Conqueror or Aerie or Electrocute and just doing it that way. Just want you to know that you really don't need to go Conqueror on mages, but anyone with high attack speed or just a high hit rate in general will tend to feel pretty good about Conqueror. Essence for getting 5 AD is nice. That's a nice buff to Sivir. It'll be more viable and more choices. I actually played a solo queue game yesterday where the opposing Tristana bought as your third. That's the correct buy. There's lots of AD carries that are CDR focused that could really use the 5 attack damage. And really, they can use the extra 20 CDR, and the AD being 65 gets it close enough to Infinity Edge that you're not really losing that much power by buying the item. Maybe you don't buy it first, but ER is definitely good. Restated that there were hotfixes to Spellthief's and Ancient Coin not working when you're by yourself. Azir gained a lot of win rate because of the attack speed growth. That's actually a really big deal. Gained a lot of power out of this. People are also playing him Conquer. Again, it's not the optimal rune in all cases for him, but this ended up actually being a really, really substantial DPS growth. And Azir seems to be in a really good spot now. So that's pretty cool. Azir, I think, is totally playable. Next up, Gnar. This is actually not all that much. It's right between 0 and 17 extra armor in Mega Gnar. It's between 0 and 34 extra magic resist in Mega Gnar. This exists. It matters. It's not massive. I think he's still sort of generically weak in solo queue, but not in a horrible spot. Just, again, generically slightly weak as a champion. And ultimately, this, I think, will be enough, though, to have pros try him, because with Urgot getting just destroyed and Scion still being a bit nerfed, although still obviously totally viable, I think lots of pros are going to be looking for extra tank top / bully laners to play. And, I mean, Gnar is what Urgot used to be, or Gnar used to be what Urgot is, or used to be, or whatever. Anyway, Gnar and Urgot are basically the same champion as far as pros concerned, which is a really abusive ranged character that becomes a tank in team fights. So Gnar is going to come back, probably. Like, they're just going to replace Gnar one for one with Urgot. Unless they really think he's not viable, but I think pros will play Gnar. Next up, some little minor nice mana cost buffs to the queue. 4 to 0 mana here. 4 to 0 seconds off devastating charge cooldown. I believe you max E second, so this goes away at level 13. And this goes away at level 9, so it's just early game buffs to Hecarim. Which is interesting because Hecarim tended to be an early game champion who tended to fall off. This just plays into that strength, which is fine. I'm just kind of bringing it up. These don't mean all that much. I think you tended to do Machete on Hecarim a fair bit for your mana costs anyway. Or Talisman, if I didn't say that right. You tend to go Talisman on Hecarim for mana costs anyway. The charge cooldown, honestly, doesn't mean that much because you're getting it once per camp or every other camp anyway. These buffs don't end up being that big. They matter in the long term. There's going to be cases where you get a Q off and you wouldn't have, or get an E off and you wouldn't have. So it's still power up, but this is fairly light. And Hecarim overall is... I don't know. It's whatever it is. He's fine. I think he's definitely not overtuned by any stretch, and I think he's certainly not overtuned after these changes either. But, I mean, he's around if you like Hecarim. I think Hecarim's fine. He's basically where I put that champion. Small bug fix to the Empowered Q on Rengar. It's only the Empowered Q. Yes, it did bonus damage in accident. Honestly, yeah, Rengar got off 1 or 2 Empowered Qs before it hit rank 2, but, like, this isn't that big of a deal, but a good bug fix. Sivir losing a little bit here because, of course, this needed to happen. It doesn't really mean all that much, though, honestly. 0.05 on the AD ratio doesn't really mean all that much, so it's not that huge of a deal. I mean, we're talking, like, 2.5 damage on Ricochet at level 1, and even super endgame when you're at, like, 200 or maybe 300 attack damage, it's still not that much, right? You're looking at, what, 15? 15-ish damage? Like, it exists, it matters, but it's not that big of a deal. Sivir's still very strong. She was, I think, the number 3 pro play champion in bot lane in the previous patch, and she will probably remain top 4. This is actually a pretty big deal here to Varus, though. The blight damage wasn't actually doing the correct amount. It was doing 2.5% no matter what. It was supposed to be 3 to 5% based on rank, so oops. And of course, if you don't play Varus much, this is the damage of popping the blight stacks with your other spells. It is not the on-hit damage. It seems to me now that the best Varus build is E-max into W-max and going back to this mid-range half-caster, half-auto-attacker build. That build is very strong. That build for Varus is very good. E-max, W-max, go back to playing it. It seems very, very strong. Play that champion. Pros seem to love playing Varus, so I think we'll see Varus as a top 5 pick as far as bot laners are concerned. Varus is back, and he was basically unseen in Pro last patch. Small update to say, hey, Kai'Sa, don't build stupid things. Funnily enough, this was the only change, and Kai'Sa gained 1% win rate. Just saying. Just saying. even in the high elo bucket. Minor updates to Tryndamere. His recommended items as well. His win rate didn't really go anywhere. That's fine. Didn't need to. UI for Nunu. That's cool. Trundle gets some really minor buffs. This is a buff to W max, which is really only a top lane Trundle thing. Yeah, Liberty in lane, right? They're assuming it's top lane Trundle here. This doesn't really affect jungle Trundle at all in any meaningful way. By the time you lose your first blue buff, you've probably finished your smite. Jungle Trundle wants to max E first or second anyway for the CC, so it really doesn't mean anything unless you're playing top lane Trundle and fighting people, which... You know, maybe they shouldn't be, right? Maybe they should be maxing W second. Maybe you should be more of a fighter on Trundle. 100% bonus attack speed is a lot of stats. One thing this could be considered for is like, look, this might be enough of a rank up incentive going from 20 to 100% attack speed to just bribe you into W second as your build. And just bribing the player to go into W second is going to mean that Trundle's a much more aggressive fighter. He's going to do a lot more damage in the 1v1s. Yeah, the pillar's not very strong anymore because it was just like the point and click receive crowd control. But I mean, there is a world where you just play aggressive Trundle and you just max W second. Maybe even first, actually, there's a chance that this is enough of a level incentive to max W over Q and simply go 1 point Q, max W. Maybe you max pillar second. I don't know. Maybe you max Q second. You know, any one of these is a possibility. But like, because keep in mind, the rank up incentive on W is not just attack speed, it's also how much healing he receives, but the move speed is flat. So if you have a 40 mana ability that gives you 100% attack speed and like 40% increased healing or something obnoxious, like even jungle Trundle can just go W max. You can consider Warrior, maybe not, but can consider it. And actually skip out on Q points and just be a WE max champion. And no one's really trying that build yet. When I was actually checking some of the data 2 nights ago, really no one was going for W max. It was like sub 1% of the builds. But there's a chance that W max is the build on Trundle, and it's optimal. So that's something to kind of consider here. Minions are ghosted, so you don't clip things into turrets any longer. Bunch of AR Earth picks. Bunch of VFX updates, which are really cool. I actually haven't seen Ken or Olaf. I haven't seen Riven in my games. I haven't seen a Wukong either. But these are all cool. These are nice changes to see. Some walk animations, that's kind of nice. Ranked updates. Challenger is open by now. LP splashing can put you into promotion series, which is nice. That happened for me. You can get decay warnings, but you can only decay when you're in diamond. That's nice. You get an upgrading ranked emote. All right, fun stuff. All right. Anyway, yeah, that's the patch basically. I don't really feel like there's much need for TLDR. The video is fairly short overall. Again, much love and thanks for everyone who sort of chimed in and said, hey, please make the video. So here it is. Y'all are wonderful human beings. Thanks for being a part of the channel. And Phreak Show comes out on Thursday with basically this content. So stay tuned for that. Bye.